Welcome to this archival rundown of the Terran-Romulan War. This catastrophic event in our history happened in 2156 through to 2160. The Empire was at a height at this time. It had recently put down a vicious rebellion from inhuman insurgents trying to undermine our great empire, and in exchange for that, they were severely punished. All the while, however, non-human eyes were watching with envy at our empire as it stretched across the Alpha Quadrant with an ever-increasing ferocity. The brave men and women of the Imperial Starfleet were first thrust into conflict with this species a number of years before the war. The first recorded encounter was 2151, when the ISS Enterprise wandered into a Romulan trap set for them to ambush the ship, cripple it, and attempt to capture its crew in the middle of a minefield. The Romulans had cloaked the mines using primitive stealth technology, which we were able to penetrate and overcome with our superior technology and human ingenuity. However, it was only the beginning of our encounters with this zealot of species. It was the first time the Terran Empire had ever really encountered an enemy that rivaled our own power and had any chance of really giving us a bloody nose. We'd had nothing but problems with this empire ever since we'd annexed the Vulcans. Why they cared so much about the Vulcans at the time was completely unknown to us, but we knew that there were tenuous connections between them. Starfleet Intelligence and Section 31 had uncovered communications, even evidence of Romulan insurgents on Vulcan. They'd made efforts to disrupt the Empire on numerous occasions, using drone ships controlled by telepresence as well as other terrorist activities, supporting rebellion. We know that the Romulans were behind the alliance to try to undermine the Empire that took place, as I said, a number of years earlier between the Tellarites, the Vulcans, and the Andorians. Although this rebellion had been unsuccessful, it was just a taste of things to come. The Empire was weakened due to this war, and had not fully rebuilt its forces. Starfleet, still licking its wounds, was suddenly confronted by a sneak attack by a vicious enemy from deep in the Beta Quadrant, not at the time a strong point of the Terran Empire. Our early bases were quickly overrun and Starfleet forces were routed. We also had to redeploy many military assets, Starfleet and Mako, to reoccupy Andoria and Vulcan to prevent their further uprising against us. The first 2 years were a criminal disappointment for the Empire. Starfleet was routed at nearly every engagement. Every counter-offensive was deterred. Every effort we made to infiltrate their territory was rebuffed by a very superb intelligence agency known as the Tal Shiar. However, the Tal Shiar, superb as they were nothing compared to Section 31, and slowly we broke down their defences. We incited rebellion amongst the Reman, a slave race we had learned that they controlled. This undermined Romulan authority and gave us some breathing room. Their leader, a particular admiral known as the Deridix, was particularly effective as a military commander. We had to respect that, and it required Starfleet to respond. Under orders from the Emperor and the Senate, many changes were made at the upper levels of Starfleet command, promoting various other more competent and less sycophantic commanders to higher levels within Starfleet command. 2 years into the war, these changes proved vital to the survival of the Imperial Starfleet and the Terran Empire, as we firstly routed all Romulan occupation forces from the fringes of our territories. Planets like Novus and Vega that had been attacked, the Romulans were rebuffed. Up until this point, the Romulans, however, had managed to avoid any direct physical landings, preferring instead, unusually, almost counterintuitively, once they had defeated any local forces or resistance, instead of occupying and controlling the region, as we would do, they would bomb it with nuclear ordnance and move on. This aggression provoked the reintegration of old Third World War nuclear weapons that were kept in storage back on Earth for a rainy day to be brought back in. They weren't bombing our slaves and our citizens with nuclear ordnance without getting a taste of their own medicine. We deployed a whole new fleet of new nuclear-armed vessels known as the Daedalus class. These augmented fleets such as the Yorktown, NX refitted classes, as well as other vessels in our armada at the time, but Starfleet was forced to improvise many more basic designs at the time, hence the sort of famous ships that were almost barrel-like in appearance that were prolific at this time. These vessels were cheap and mass-produced, much like the Sherman tanks of the Second World War. They were cheap, nasty, easy to produce in large numbers. Although individually weak, they carried enough ordnance to fire at long range, and with swarm attack tactics were able to overwhelm the Romulan vessels. The Romulans' unwillingness to compromise on their technical proficiency was their greatest weakness, their arrogance, their belief that us lowly Terrans new to the interstellar theatre would be no match for the superior self-belief of those arrogant Romulan, green-blooded, inhuman monsters. Throughout the war, we would never truly learn the Romulans' real objective. We know that they attempted to attack Terra itself without success. They made multiple attempts to invade, subjugate and destroy our colonies, attacking innocent Terran citizens, men, women and children, the hard-working backbone of the Empire, bombed from orbit by these Xeno scum. They never even had the honor to show their faces to their enemy, but they would show their back as they were slowly routed as the Empire rallied a new and aggressive battle strategy, culminating in the Battle of Sharon, where Diderotix himself was killed, his flagship destroyed, and the bulk of the Romulan fleet annihilated. This combined with a series of sneak attacks behind the Romulan lines, eliminating their supply lines, convoys, destroying several of their outer colonies, and completely obliterating their forward bases, eliminating completely their ability to power project beyond their core territory. The Empire pushed on, destroying base after base as the Romulans offered to surrender, but it became increasingly clear to Starfleet that the further we went in to Romulan territory, the greater the resistance was coming, and although we could build ships faster than they could destroy them, the rate at which we were losing lives in a war that had already dragged on for 4 years was becoming something of a political embarrassment to the Emperor, and as a result, a decision had to be made. A compromise. The first neutral zone was created. An agreement and conditional surrender on the part of the Romulans, of course, would agree to an invisible line in space that both sides would agree not to cross. Starfleet would build a series of heavily fortified military installations to watch the Romulans. These bases were directly controlled by Section 31, but manned by Starfleet personnel, with large contingents of Makos kept on site for a rapid deployment if the Romulans were ever to dare to breach that border. The Empire knew it needed to reconsolidate its forces and refortify the interior boundaries of the Empire. Otherwise we faced potentially becoming vulnerable to inferior Klingon attacks from other borders of the Empire, something that at that time would be intolerable. The Empire, for the first time in its history, was forced to capitulate, a lesser victory over our enemies, but a victory nonetheless. And although it would be many years before we would learn the true reason behind the Romulan unprovoked aggression against the Terran Empire, we would never forget what they did, and we would make them pay in the decades to come, when they would be foolish enough to cross the border again in the 23rd century. But that is a different conflict, and one that would finally see the Romulan Star Empire brought low.